Session 3, we're talking about aligning corporate communication strategies with public diplomacy efforts. With us on the panel is Mr. Amr Rakha, who is the Commercial Director of Sigma Capital. Dr. Ashraf Rida is not going to be joining us today. Unfortunately, he's not feeling well. Dr. Dali Abdel Qadir, Head of Marketing Communications Department, African International Bank. Ms. Ghada Hamouda, CMO and Head of Corporate Communications, Citadel Capital. And Ms. May Gammel, Head of Marketing, EFG Hermes Holding. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for being with us today. This is a panel in the private sector, so I feel a little bit more comfortable and at home, also in a language that I think I master a little bit better than my Arabic. But Ghada, do you mind if I start with you? And let me ask you a hypothetical question. If one of your staff at Citadel Capital Communications, or any of your subsidiary companies, or any of your portfolio companies, was to make a spelling mistake at an international conference, international press conference, not only in the foreign language, but also in the local language, what would you do to that person?
Unattainable. This is not even a possible mistake, is all I will tell you. It's impossible to go to market, as we call it in our discipline, without having done all the right steps. From first planning who we're trying to address, what their needs are, what we're going to say, how we're going to say it, what mediums are we going to use, and in each of those mediums, how can we achieve relevance, and how can we make sure that it is immaculate in execution so that I can, at the end of the day, achieve the mission that I have and my objective, my goal. And prior, we're doing a rehearsal prior we go public with something of this magnitude. And during and post, every second is monitored. And after we finish, we go and review what we've done, what lessons we have learned, so that in the next one, we're prepared. And it's just, this is how the process works. It's just unattainable that you have something of this magnitude with such basic rudimentary mistakes. Unacceptable.
To continue on that very particular point, and I am referring to the SIS press conference that was held 2 days ago. And in an effort of what we're trying to do in terms of promoting public diplomacy, obviously public or national image is part of that public diplomacy effort. And we are being hindered step by step as we go along with things like that. Instead of reading the headlines the next day that Egypt, embarks upon this new constitution and a referendum in January, we were
targeting foreigners. Targeting foreigners, quote unquote, Financial Times, quote unquote, The Telegraph.
Where's the problem, where's the mechanism problem for something like that to happen? What is, in your opinion, and believe me, and I've said this to a lot of my foreign friends, especially diplomats, I said, it's not a lack of talent or professionalism in Egypt that results in these catastrophic mistakes. But so what is it? How can we explain it to people? So when we build public diplomacy policies and strategies, we have to have the proper infrastructure. And this is the very basic.
Let me just say that, let me step back. This is a moment in time, this is a juncture in Egypt's history that the whole world is looking. It's an opportunity for every institution, for every one of us, private, public sector, government institutions, to look at what we're doing wrong and how we must prepare to confront the world. So the question is, do we have the right system and process in place to manage Egypt's image through this transition and forward? And that's the question I ask myself, and I'm sure every Egyptian, not just professional, asks himself, and every businessman and woman as we go into conferences. Who's managing this? Who owns this function that sits there and says, here is my strategic plan. Here is what we're trying to do as a country, on the developmental plan, in terms of the image that we're trying to communicate, in terms of the misperceptions we're trying to shatter. Here's what we're doing in terms of our public, our diplomacy efforts in general to try to address it. Here is who's in charge. Here is the vision, the mission, the goals. Here is how we're going to monitor progress, how we're going to execute our plan, the people that we're going to put in place that are trained, how we're trying to achieve coordination, so we have tansiq across all the different facets, points of contact with Egypt, whether it's media, whether it's TV, whether it is conferences, whether it is, my God, I mean, the world is looking. And it's a great moment for us to tell who we are and who we're becoming. And it's at that moment, if we don't sit, align, have a clear plan and clear message, and try to make sure that we are monitoring our progress over time towards these goals, that we'll continue to have faux pas like that. Who owns this? Is it Ministry of Information? Is it Wizarة الخارجية? We need to identify the owner that will set the tone, whether it's public or just or private diplomacy or just across business institutions, and try to make sure that we are all working on a coherent image, message, that we're monitoring that progress and that we're refining. It's fine, but you cannot put the wrong people in place and then you can't afford mistakes like the ones we have just seen. It's totally, that's why it's just, I can't comprehend. And I hope we take the right steps. I mean, it's not a question of we stop. Let's learn. There is technical expertise in Egypt everywhere. There are think tanks that can help us define how we go to market with a message. Let me just tell you, the one moment when we had, and I don't like to talk politics, but when you have Sisi, General Sisi, standing there to the world, informing them of the new Egypt and what happened after Tani Saura, our second revolution. Let me just tell you that the orchestration of that moment, it would have made such a great difference if you had the forces of the civil society that stand there to tell the world what they have decided and what they're doing, and then introduce the role of General Sisi. It's the sequence, it's the face, the spokesperson. I have to tell you, there is so much that needs to be done. And unless we recognize the problem and approach it, and there's lessons to be taken from across the world. I have documents and studies here. America today, every day, sits to refine its public diplomacy and its diplomacy policies, what is the agenda is, who is taking it, what kind of training is needed, what kind of realignment is needed. It's something you do continuously. We do it in the private sector. We need to see it happen in Egypt. I'm sorry, but it's hurtful to see us where we are today.
It is, but again, this is demonstration of the talents of the professional communications people that are here in Egypt, and it would have just taken a phone call to one of us, I think, just review what was happening. But anyway, I just wanted to start with that because it was the most recent concept. When we were talking about public diplomacy, people looked at me and said, what public diplomacy are you talking about when your SIS can't even spell, you know, in Arabic, yet alone just in English? I'll move on to Dr. Dalia. With the same sentiment, you know, I mean, Ghada just reached a point where she's just going to go crazy. What is your take on this? What are we missing? What are we missing as a government, as a country, in terms of implementing? Maybe let's move away from public diplomacy for a bit and talk about national image.
Okay.
I think that's really, because the same thing happened with trade. We wanted to discuss public diplomacy, but then the issues with trade are just so technically problematic that regardless of how much public diplomacy that you're able to do, as long as you get the product and your distribution network right, it's not going to work. And your trade agreements from the very beginning, public diplomacy, I don't think is affecting trade as much as it would affect communications in this perspective. What is your sentiment? Where do you think we can solve this problem?
Well, Ashraf, I think what's unique about this panel is bringing up two issues that seem very disconnected: corporate communications and national policies. I mean, at a glance, what's the connection? But let me tell you, when I started to reflect about the connection or the link between these two concepts, I found that they really trigger a power formula: communications and politics. Think back in history, when you think of Hitler, his closest aide was Joseph Goebbels. He was the minister of PR, of propaganda. Think of Nasser. He understood the value of communication in promoting his national plans. Sawt al-Arab, to promote and drive his ambition for Arab unity. How he used Abd al-Halim and Umm Kulthum to promote Sadd al-Ali. So when you have communications and politics, this is a huge, humongous power to leverage. Zionism is a case in point. Zionism is about two things: ideology and PR. So with proper PR and proper communication, Israel is outperforming 22 Arab states. So, as a matter of fact, communication and politics are something to reckon with. But the question is, we were talking about corporate communications. I don't want to talk about government now, because if we talk about government, we will get nowhere. But what can we do as private sector, as corporates, to promote Egypt's image? And here, now that we established the relationship or the importance of communications and politics, the question is, what do corporates have to do with this? I mean, am I responsible as someone responsible for marketing and communications in a bank to promote national image? Should I do it? No, I should not. But let me tell you that I have to, for so many reasons. Actually, we do not market and communicate in vacuum. And you forget it, yani, if we need to promote our products, we should build the context, we should relate to the bigger environment. Yani, I remember having a discussion with my team during the revolutions, this period, when everything was violent and volatile, and the headlines had news of riots, and it really felt bad promoting a product. And we said, what are we going to do? So why do we think communications in corporates have to address the political and economic landscape? Because we do not act in vacuum. Because marketing is a very dynamic, marketing communications are quite dynamic. There are so many changes. We are in a dynamic landscape. We have social media. We have a growing segment of customers who are very knowledgeable with high level of awareness. We have crises, poverty crisis, environmental crisis. So the old traditional marketing is futile. That's why many would argue that marketing is dead. The marketing of Philip Kotler, the 4 Ps, when the marketeer and the communication specialist would only be focused, myopically focused on getting his product out to the outside world regardless. Now we cannot do that in isolation of social and environmental challenges. So having the whole picture will make your communication better, setting the connection. And let me tell you our personal experience 10 years ago, when we were mandating growth. We had nothing but increasing profit and growing. And at that time, we realized that the connection between the profit and promoting our product and the society was quite crucial. And we started a new trend to establish a foundation for social development focusing on health. That was 10 years ago. It was very spontaneous. We were not thinking CSR, but we're thinking of establishing the connection between business and the society. 10 years later, the need to establish the connection between business and the wider environment became more compelling with the revolution. We saw the need to connect profit with the social and environmental dimensions. And let me tell you that actually, practically speaking, we started a campaign and we were bent to promote it globally. We saw that a huge problem that's responsible for many of our current challenges in Egypt is the disconnection between finance and human concerns, mainly the social and the environmental. That the financial industry is very much bent onto itself. It has nothing to do, it's growing in isolation of environmental and social crises. So we came up with humanizing finance is a new concept that we want to promote. We saw the need to get the financial institutions to attend the social and environmental. While they grow their profit, they add value socially and environmentally as well. And we started to mandate a global PR firm last May to get this concept to be debated, to be discussed in global circles among other financial institutions. So humanizing finance is something we thought should start in Egypt and from Egypt to the rest of the world. Why from Egypt? Because Egypt suffered from the disconnection between economics and the social and environmental dimensions. Egypt, prior to the revolution, had one of the highest growing GDP rates among emerging markets. We were doing very well, but there was a disconnection between this economic growth and inequality, poverty, and pollution. So this disconnection is really threatening for Egypt's political well-being and, I would say, even national security. So our role as a corporate or a private sector communication, to see why not, if we can get the financial industry in Egypt to get closer to the society, to break this dilemma between a sluggish political landscape and an inactive economic setting. The financial sector in Egypt is very prepared to take the lead and change this dilemma or deadlock. So we thought that if we get the financial sector to attend the bottom of the pyramid, to learn how to make money from microfinance, from funding clean energy projects like solar wind energy, and to create new realities in Egypt. Politics is waiting for economic growth to stabilize, and the economy in Egypt is waiting for political stability. And in between, we thought that the financial industry in Egypt, who's very well, is really in a good shape. I mean, it successfully conducted a reform program, decently survived the financial crisis and revolutions, and is quite in good shape to take the lead and improve the reality of this country, the fortune of this country. So humanizing finance can take place in Egypt. We are ready to do that. And let me tell you something, that Egypt has the energy to impact change. Noam Chomsky wrote that Tahrir movement inspired Occupy Wall Street and 500 other movements that protested financial greed and corruption. So this country has the energy to effect change on a global level. So what I'm actually trying to debate or challenge you to think is not about improving Egypt's image as much as impacting global change that resonates with Egypt's weight. You can affect change. It's not only about image. We really don't care about the image as much as we care. This is a very dynamic moment in time. And as Ghada said, this part of time, this moment in history is very rich. As much as we're suffering from daily challenges and instability that's hitting every one of us. But this is a very precious moment in time in our history. And how we deal with it, I agree that we have to think and think, but we have to take action as corporates, as communication, leveraging global media to get the message out. And I always say, would you affect a new, reconceptualize financial thinking to get closer to human concerns? Can we do it here from Egypt? The answer is yes. We are. The financial sector in Egypt is in better shape than the ailing industries abroad. They already fell, and they don't realize that this is over, that they have to reconceptualize finance. The other thing is, when I think about it, mathematics was conceived here in Egypt 3,000 years ago. So we can affect change. Algebra started in this part of the world 1,000 years ago. So forget about that, we have to change and for new developments and new concepts to come up from abroad. I think at this point of time, the bottom line is communication and politics are intertwined, that corporates can take the lead in affecting change and globally. The only thing I say that we have, to take it in our hands and move, because as civil society, because if you wait for governments, you might wait for long and it will be pointless then. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Delia. I completely agree with you. I'm one of the advocates for less government regulation, more private sector, free market economics. Definitely, I completely agree with you. But that's going to move me on to May. AFG, one of the biggest financial institutions in Egypt and the region, as a matter of fact. Now, you've been extremely active. Post 2011, the 25th of January revolution, you've been extremely active. Post the 30th of June revolution. And when I mean active, I mean as a communication part, as an investment bank. You were out there, you were traveling around, you were going to communicate a message to global investors and portfolio fund managers. Yes. So when we were talking about this on the trade panel, there's one more definition that came out from public diplomacy, which is when they mention the fact that they go off on their business trips. I mean, do we consider business trips to be public diplomacy in a sense? And we could take it as an extra definition, but like Dr. Dali was saying, we don't act in a vacuum. If you're going to pitch success of your corporate company or your corporate entity today, you must pitch it within the country that it's in. And hence, 3/4 of your actual pitch towards the investors is this political stability, economic stability, growth of Egypt, I mean, all of that. And you focus more on the country itself. How did you receive this? What's the sentiment that you had from what we're considering to be aligning corporate communications of a company as large as EFG Hermes with the roadmap that is happening in Egypt at the time when you went off to London, when you went off to the States and other parts of the Arab world? So if you can just touch upon that and how you feel, what recommendations you can give the Egyptian government to, at least provide you with the proper information to be able to align your corporate communications and efforts with whatever strategy, if any, for public diplomacy in Egypt.
Thank you, Ashraf. I'd like to just make everyone visualize this with me. It's called bridging the gaps. Bridging the gaps is very important, and this is what communication does. So basically, if you don't have informed people, they will not make informed decisions. And this is what we've done after the revolution. If you want foreign direct investment to stay in Egypt, if you wanted the stock market to maintain its value, you had to speak to the people investing in the country. And this is basically the initiative we did, and this is a common practice in the business. The conferences, the roadshows, all the meetings that were arranged were basically bringing the listed companies to meet the investors together with key government officials so they can understand the situation in Egypt. If people don't understand what's going on the ground, how can they maintain their investments? So communication is key, it's essential. If people don't understand where the country is heading, the business plans of the firms, how they plan to grow, how the stock market plans to handle the situation at hand, with all this, people would have definitely drawn most of their investments in Egypt. So this was a very important part and a very important milestone for us. What's the formula? What's the story about bridging the gaps? Bridging the gaps is very essential because from a marketing perspective, it's always very exciting. You can go ahead and create a fantastic product, a fantastic service, put it on the shelf. Is it going to sell itself? It won't, I'm sorry. So this is where the science of marketing and communication comes in. We turn simple products and services into an attractive and engaging need. So people would definitely react towards it. And this is what we are asking the government and what I think public diplomacy is advocating. If you want people to react and engage in a cause, in an initiative, in a program, then you definitely have to sell what it's about, sell what is needed from the people, show them the effect, show them what their life is going to be with this product. And we've seen wonderful brands do this. It's a great science. So basically, communication is essential. So that is one thing. Another thing that is very important is that how do you put all this together? Communication is not an amateur thing. So you don't, like Ashraf said, put a banner behind you and say, okay, it's just a banner. No, it's not just a banner. The banner, the faces on the banner, the words on the banner, everything engages the audience. Everything has a meaning. Everything should be taken with great responsibility. The images on the banner should be images that reflect your target audience, should be an image of how the lives of people are going to be affected. The words, they are the things that move people towards engaging. So communication is quite essential. We have seen leaders move people with words. We have seen brands move people with loyalty. It's an art. It's not something that is done by coincidence. It takes a lot of professionals and it takes a lot of studies. And you need to understand always your target audience. If you are going to a convention, if you are trying to sell Egypt as a platform for tourism, for example, you need to understand your audience. You need to understand what are their needs. Let's take tourism as a sector. If Egypt now, and this is what it should be really doing and working hard on, promoting tourism once again. You have different types of tourists. So you need to understand the psychographics of your target audience. This is the key part. Russians don't come to Egypt like the French do, like the Japanese do. So each target, each segment has different interests, and these interests can be met. What is the French tourist looking for? The French tourist is looking for civilization, for the pharaonic monuments, for the heritage. What is the Russian tourist looking for? He's looking for wonderful beaches, very luxurious resorts. So people have different needs. And these needs are met in different ways, in different messages, in different contexts. And unless we know the people that we are talking to, what they need, we will never manage to give them what they want. So we have to change the dynamics and mechanics of how we do things. And we have to communicate. I think Egypt has done a fantastic and wonderful achievement with the two revolutions back to back. I think we've taken the world by surprise. We took ourselves by surprise, and we've done a great job. But really, this is just the beginning. This is really just the beginning. We have a lot to work on. We have a lot of awareness initiatives that we need to engage in. And to get everyone on board, this is a very hard task. So I believe that Egypt today needs to be aligned. We need to act like one country, heading towards one goal, set all differences aside. And we need to do this from a marketing and communication perspective, that we need to find the common grounds. We have a lot of parties, we have a lot of sects, but this has never differentiated a country. So it's very key that we communicate today, what does Egypt stand for as a country? Why aren't we focused on health, education? Why aren't we focused on a lot of things? Why are we just focused on the differences? So I think having a lot of awareness campaigns is essential. Again, Ghada and Dalia spoke wonderfully about how the public sector can engage, and the public sector has to engage in awareness programs. We need a lot of on-ground awareness programs, and you will be surprised how people are going to change. Examples work very well. Do you all remember the campaign that was done in 2005 for the taxes? Did you see how the very simple-minded person engaged in such a campaign? You will be surprised by from the results of the campaign, how the government was collecting taxes because it has managed to raise awareness. So it's not rocket science. It's very easy. Communicate the right messages, engage the people in the right manner, and you will have results instantly. So it's a science, and we really have a long journey ahead of us, and we really need to engage.
Thank you very much, May. I agree with you on that point as well. One of my specific concerns regarding products, Egyptian products, and Amra, I want to come to you on this one, is regardless of how well you market a specific private sector product and distribute it well and export it, this is where country image and public diplomacy really can impact a product, despite the fact that you've done such a fantastic job in marketing it. So it's a catch-22, because it's very true that if your product is not of high quality, people are not going to buy it regardless of where it comes from. But we've seen, for example, a couple of years back, Sotheby's, which was, I think, a British company that was mistook for being an American company, and was just, I mean, regardless of what it is, it was a British company, and because we had a problem with the Americans, that they left. They actually left. I mean, it was just the biggest lack of awareness that is possible. So here, how do you maintain your specific product? Is it possible for you to be able to sell a service or a product without having that proper image of the country behind you?
No, I would say definitely not. In fact, the question regarding public diplomacy, if you think about it, if you try to structure it, it's not much different than trying to export a product. They're very similar. You know, the analogy is clearly there. If I'm trying to sell a product abroad and there is an issue with the country's image in general as an exporter of the product, I will probably get no's, you know, because some other exporter has already beat me to a customer and has made a bad deal with them, and now Egypt, you know, is not a great source of this product. And we've seen this. We've actually seen this in some businesses we're involved in right now, where we're exporting some mining products, and every time we knock doors, we're starting to hear, you know, we're sorry, you know, we've dealt with Egyptians before, and there's been a problem with them. And this is an export. Yes. And so there's an image issue, you know, when as countries try to deal with Egypt as a source of import, there's an image issue. This is not much different than what's going on in Egypt as well. So let's just try to conceptualize it this way. We have a product which is the political atmosphere in Egypt, what's going on, and we're trying to communicate what's happening abroad in the best interest of Egypt. What we have to do in order to do that is, first of all, understand what's happening, so that's the product itself, understand the ongoings, and then understand your customer. You know, what are their requirements? You have to understand that these customers abroad come from a completely different worldview, not ours. They have different values, and these values force them to prioritize things differently than we do. So the message that the government may be sending to Egyptians on the ground may be very different than the message that's being sent abroad in order to address the country's public image issue. The same goes with products. There's not much difference there. If I'm selling a product abroad, there are specs, and these specs have to be met. The customer wants the product according to these specs. I may do business with them once, and if they buy the product and they find that it's not according to specs, they may revoke my letter, my letter of guarantee. They may take the product, whatever. But definitely, I have contributed to hurting the image of Egypt. That's how I'd like to think about the public diplomacy issue. You know, we have, and I think May spoke about it more or less that way. We have a product that we're trying to communicate abroad, and we have to have people who understand this product and know how to turn the product into a message and communicate it according to the recipient of the message, according to their values, according to their worldview, according to what they consider right and what they consider wrong. If we do it any other way, then we're bound to fail in sending or building the image that we want. And the other issue that we have to consider is, when you talk about trade image may not be a priority today, but at one point it will be. And someone up there, has to think about, what is the priority today? We have to have a long-term plan for our public image and address different issues. When you talk about tourism, there will be issues. When you talk about exports, there will be issues. But today, what is happening in Egypt is what should be taking priority, but should not be planned, away completely from the rest of the public image issues that we'll have to deal with in the future. I wanted to double back on the. I don't want to dwell on the banner, but I just want to double back on. I don't want to dwell on what happened, but I have one of my employees who's responsible for communication. When he joined our company, I told him one thing. Your mistake in anything that's produced is as big as the audience that receives it. It's that simple. So if you have an internal newsletter and there's a spelling mistake, I'll forgive you. 200 people at Sigma will read it. It's fine, no problem. If you put an ad in a low circulation newspaper and there's a spelling mistake, I'm not going to be very happy. But now imagine that you are communicating to a world audience and making mistakes. I think only a person with a communications background understands this. The wider the audience to whom the message is communicated, the more costly the mistake is. When they were having the conference and the whole world was watching, it wasn't such a big deal that there was a spelling mistake. For me, touching upon your question to Gheda, what would you have done? I would have fired them completely on the spot.
Nice.
Yes. Well, yeah. First step, fire them, and then think about what you're going to do to fix the impact. Yeah. So.
Thank you. I'm going to move back to Gheda on something really important now. If we look at the usage or utilization of the private sector in the development of marketing, communications, public relations for the government. Now, the Egyptian government, regardless of who's paying the money, the Egyptian government has hired or acquired the services of Glover Park Group, which is an American advocacy firm in Washington, D.C. And I believe, if the number is correct, about $250,000 US monthly retainer. And that's a lot of money. I'm sure they deserve it. I don't know what exactly that they do. I haven't read the brief. I've asked for the brief, haven't received the brief, called Glover Park, spoke to them, asked them for the brief that the Egyptian government gave them. They didn't receive the brief. Want to know who's communicating with them. I'm just saying, as an example, why isn't the Egyptian government outsourcing to private sector companies that do communication, marketing, and public relations? We've got very, very talented people in this country that are capable of doing this. You hire them as multinational corporates. You're happy with them. You're happy with the standards. You're very specific on it. So where's the problem? Is it again the bureaucracy of the government hiring people, giving them low salaries without any kind of professional background and experiences, giving them responsibilities of things like SIS conferences, and that's where the failure is? Why isn't there an outsourcing policy between the government and the private sector in public relations, communications, and marketing?
I think it goes back to the inherent understanding of what is our agenda, what is our vision for the diplomacy and an Egypt image, managing it moving forward. Let me just make a few points. The first one starts with what are the goals we're aligning behind here, moving forward as a nation, as a country. We're trying to brand Egypt, or rebrand Egypt. No one understands, are we Islamists? Are we seculars? What are we doing? Are we pro-democracy? What kind of corrupt? What kind of country are we? I think we do need to go back to the drawing board, bring in technical experts. I don't mind bringing in think tanks, but let's brainstorm and let's come up with a clear understanding.
That is step one. That was identifying your national identity.
Before you sit and start to send images, and by the way, it is private sector, it is every point of interface. It's these press conferences, it's every meeting and every off the record, on the record interface that you make that shapes the image of Egypt and shapes an image of a brand, and we all need to take it very seriously. But I think it starts from first having this very clear systematic process, a systematic strategic planning process put in place for managing Egypt's image. That starts from there. And if you start there and say, in today's world, in the 21st century, what role is Egypt going to play? What do we need? What can we give? What can we contribute to the world? Everyone is looking at us. We're consumers. They're looking at us and we're lagging behind. And frankly speaking, we're a burden on the world today. And we, meaning developing countries in general. How is Egypt going to come out of this? How are we going to position ourselves to be a contributor to the development and advancement? And what industries are we going to try to excel in? What can we give and what are we going to take? Defining our clear agenda, clear brand. Positioning versus the competition. I mean, it's the basics that we do in marketing. Why Egypt, not India? Why Egypt, not Pakistan? Why Egypt? We need to, and I have to tell you, I go to any any business conference or investment conference, and the question is always, tell us about Egypt. You know what? Business people are considered, they are ambassadors. I mean, we, the private sector, and the businessmen are totally ambassadors. I'll quote, it's time to appreciate that the country's businessmen are its best ambassadors abroad. That was the Financial Times, in one of the Financial Times articles. We are, and every one of us, by the way, is an ambassador. So I go back to the role of the private sector, the question that was asked. Different audiences, different interfaces. The private sector, in fact, needs to coordinate and align. We need lobbying for our agenda. Therefore, it's part of the development plan of the country. Therefore, all of us need to be aligned, whether it's GAFI, whether it's Ministry of Trade, whether it's Ministry of Investment, all of the different interfaces, Ministry of Information. I mean, it's what are you saying? What are we all collectively saying? So the sum is bigger than the parts. So that when I'm sitting there at the World Economic Forum in Africa, the only Egyptian company on the ground, what does this say about our interest in Africa? What does this say about our international agenda and trade or interest in doing business with them? And I think we need to understand all these dots connect and engage the private sector. Listen to their years of experience. Their technical expertise is there. They need lobbying for their agenda, so we need to coordinate and align. We need to use the business associations that exist. We need to all have the right message. We all sing from the same sheet. I mean, any of us. You don't go into any, local press conference, let alone an international press conference or international engagement, without making sure every single one of us is aligned. What are the key messages? What are we going to continue to emphasize and reinforce so that we have succeeded in communicating what we're trying to say? So I think we need to be proud of our technical expertise locally, as you said. It's part of our pride, national pride and identity. And we're going to promote that face of Egypt. There has to be a conviction. So why aren't we using this local talent? I think we maybe have lost confidence. And maybe we need, as I said, to do a lot more of self-assessment and self-examination as we define who we're going to use, what we're going to say, and how we're going to say it, and should definitely use a lot of the Egyptian talent. And one final word when I say ambassadors, we do the Citadel Capital Scholarship Foundation. And I will just say that we consider every scholar to be an ambassador. They're ambassador of Egypt, about Egypt. They go in and they represent Egypt, but it's also an exchange. They go there to learn, so they bring to us the best so that we continue to improve. We need to do this. We need to just embrace, we need to recognize our strength. We need to put cultural exchange and interchange, and we go and put a good face for Egypt, and we need to bring back some learning and continue to improve. And you have a lot. I'm an expat. I mean, I'm an American Egyptian. I lived in the States 25 years almost. And I'm here. I want to see this country do well. I mean, there's many of us. And we want to be part of rebuilding Egypt. So, yes, I hope that our expertise is sought and we offer it. And I hope that everyone here in this room that's interested can play a role.
Absolutely. I agree with you. Dr. Dalia, now let's move to another step, just to carry on from what I was asking Ghada about, the participation of the private sector and the outsourcing and that relationship between private sector and government on communications. Now, I've had a lot of financial institutions as clients, and as a matter of fact, I find them a little bit more bureaucratic and more sensitive and more red tape oriented than most government entities I've worked with, especially the larger the organization becomes, somebody like Credit Suisse or UBS, for example. I mean, just to get somebody to come and sit on the table and say hello needs about 27 emails and 28 approvals. Yeah, it's even worse than having somebody from the American Embassy come and speak. I mean, that's the type of red tape that you're getting. Do you think, as corporate policies, all four of you represent some of the largest, or four of the largest financial institutions in Egypt. Has it been said to you, try and stay away from the alignment with the government, stay away from politics, we don't want to be involved, we want to be directly involved, stay away from any kind of reaction or interaction, regarding political and economic instability, try and keep it corporate as much as possible. Is that really, could that be a hindering issue, the corporate policies themselves, trying to stay away from the principles of government and basic diplomacy in general?
Well, actually, the only constraints that we have is to stay away from anything that has to do with politics and religion. But public policy is very much...
They speak about both. I mean, policy today, we talk about politics and talk about...
No, politics in the sense of which party are we allying with, which sector are we supporting. And I think this is a very constraining area. You better get away from it, so that you will have the room to conceive and create new initiatives. And as far as our institution is concerned, we really were very dynamic. Yani 10 years ago, we were the first institution to establish a foundation for social development, regionally, and as far as I researched back then, globally. I mean, there were big financial institutions with big grants for charity and philanthropy, but no foundations. So, I bet you, I mean, it all has to do with the persons in charge and the calibers, but I think there has been room to create new trends, to get into social field, getting into health and education is something, I mean, a lot of people criticized us back then. What have you got to do with health, public sector hospitals? I mean, you can attend microfinance. But at that time, we thought that as a bank, we cannot grow in a society that's not growing. And for Egypt to grow, it's about Egyptians. And for Egyptians to grow, it's about health and education. And that's why we thought about the foundation called We Owe It to Egypt Foundation. And it was not named after the bank. It was Wafa'an Masr, so that it will be an umbrella for all banks and institutions. So I don't see that we have challenges. There could be some heaviness or sluggishness in movement. It's all because when you don't have a vision, when you're not motivated, when you don't have a focal point to proceed, you cannot go anywhere. But actually, I do not see that we have any bureaucratic limitations or anything that should pull us down. Really, if you are determined and you have a vision, and you can see the bigger picture. I always say, once you have the bigger picture in mind and you can see the connections between finance, society, the environment, governance, the whole thing, I mean, you can grow. I don't think, I mean, when there is will, there is a way. And if we keep on saying limitations, government, bureaucracy, red tape, we know. But I always say, this is the time to make a difference and to see things in a different perspective. وبدل ما أن نلعن الظلام نضيء شمعة. يعني أنا دلوقتي بقيت أفهم المثل ده. Thank you.
Let me برضو move on from basically the same question that I addressed to Dr. Dalia. Again, it's the red tape, it's the bureaucracy, the corporate red tape, and Dr. Dalia said specifically in their circumstances, in their case, stay away from politics, stay away from religion. I think all corporates really want to stay away from these things. But being in the circumstances that we're in right now, again, we are talking about politics and religion because that is the dire straight sort of situation that we're in right now. Which brings me to a comment that Ambassador Gamal Bayoumi made to my two private sector colleagues from the textile industry, Mohammed Esma and Magdi Tolba. And he said, you know, public diplomacy should not be funded by the private sector. I will not accept a cup of tea from a private sector person or a ticket from the European Union. And he really, he put it from that perspective. So how do we expect, one, to align corporate communications with the public diplomacy efforts under the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the direction of the national foreign policy, if we cannot be involved in both politics or religion, which is, again, what we're discussing? And the second thing, how can we really, I agree with Ambassador Gamal Bayoumi about the funding. How do you make sure that that money that is being spent isn't for the specific interests of the private sector and are really going on a CSR perspective, but I don't want to call it CSR, and NSR, I guess, you know, national corporate responsibility, if you want to put it in that perspective. How do you see it? How do you see it? Do you really think that that would hinder the whole principle of what we're trying to do, aligning corporate communications with public diplomacy efforts?
Can we just take charity out of the equation? Because what organizations do, it's not charity. Any organization needs to be profitable. And in doing so, they need to serve certain things. So organizations do not succeed out of charity. They need to be profitable organizations. So this is one thing just to get out of the way. So the government shouldn't be concerned about funding from cooperations. All the government needs to do is set the right strategic frameworks for these organizations to operate, and these organizations are going to be profitable naturally. So it's like a natural formula. It doesn't need someone to fund, it doesn't need someone to pamper. It's a natural formula, and it doesn't need to have hidden agendas. So this is one thing, if it answers your question.
If I could just stop you for a point. Remember the GCC conference that was just held recently? Yeah. Okay, would we define that, and I'm just going to speak openly, I mean, the Egyptian government did call up some of the biggest companies in Egypt and said, hey, listen, we need help to finance this specific conference, which was done under the auspices of the Prime Minister, that was partially funded by our neighbors in the Gulf. That's my point. I mean, is that really part of the public diplomacy effort, support, help? Is that charity? I see it as charity, but how do you define that?
That's not charity. Sponsorship is a very key aspect of marketing and communication. A company prospers from sponsorship. Branding is a very strong tool. So it's a win-win situation for everyone. The government calls for a conference like the Egypt GCC conference. The private sector has to participate. The participation of the private sector brings on the expertise of the private sector, the success stories the private sector has, the clients, the connections, the network, so they bring a great deal on board. What do they get in return? They get branding. Don't underestimate the power of branding. Having your brand name being visible to all the audience, this is something companies pay for. This is a known practice globally. So it's a win-win situation for everyone. And such events should lead to business opportunities. So the private sector does not go to such events if there are no business opportunities. What's the point? You go to such events to create business opportunities, to network, to find new deals, to bring investments. So it's a business platform. It's not charity. Again, it is really not charity. It's a win-win situation, and both have to utilize it very smartly for their own good. And I think it's also a very healthy relationship between the government and the public sector and the private sector, because they all complete the picture. And when you have panelists on the stage in such an event, they just give you a full picture of how things are. So you hear the story from the public sector side, you hear the story from the private sector side, you engage the government. Again, the government has a key role to play in placing the strategic frameworks for organizations to function. Organizations want to succeed, and to do so, there are certain laws, regulations that needs to be instilled by the government so these companies can perform better. When companies perform better, the economy prospers. So again here, just to show everyone, when companies make money, they create employment. They create a consumer market. It all moves your GDP. So there is no charity, once more, in this relationship. So it's a win-win situation.
Excellent. It does make sense. But you know what's interesting about that is really it's a means for us to be able to formulate the relationship between the private sector and the government, and what role we play and what role they play, and how we can support each other. And I think that is a fantastic example that it was undertaken as an initiative by the Ministry of Investment. It was already supported by our partners from abroad, but then the role of the private sector came in really to give the push, give it more added value, bring in, potential business and stories, success stories in Egypt. So that formula, moving from May to that formula, how do you see it? Do you really believe this is how we should start approaching the government in terms of our relationship with them? Should they be taking the initiatives and we supporting them, or should we as a private sector start taking initiatives and have them supported under the auspices of? How do you want to formulate this?
I want to move just a second away from answering the question. I'm going to get to it, but I want to lay a foundation in my mind that just to bring some clarity to the issues. I don't think the dynamics of how the private sector will interact with the government is the big issue. I don't think financing the public diplomacy efforts is the big issue. In the end, it's a small ticket compared to a lot of the spending that the government does. I think the issue is gonna always be the product, and I use the word product, and then the word national identity was used, and actually that is the product that we should be working on, finalizing. Our entire crisis in Egypt is a crisis of national identity. Basically different sects trying to impose an idea of what Egypt's national identity is. Once we agree on a national identity, then you have the product. Everything else following that, how do we interact with the private sector, how do we finance, that's going to be easy because that's on the tactical level. Having said that,
how do you define the current product post 30th June?
It's still the national identity. That's been the product that.
How does the product look now? I mean, we've obviously put some kind of framework after the 30th of June. Okay, so we've got all these little parts and pieces of it. How does it look to you? How do you sell it today?
On a personal level, I would be more aligned with a view of what's happening. But the thing about the national product is that it has to represent the majority of Egyptians. So it's not enough for us in this room to feel satisfied with, this is where we think Egypt should be going. At some point, it should be something that communicates to the majority of the population that can end up calling this country theirs. That's the bottom line. And in the polarism or the polarity of society that we're witnessing right now, that's actually a very big struggle. And that's what's going to continue to affect. I mean, I could give you a small example, completely unrelated to politics, just what's going on with the Olympic Committee, with the National Olympic Committee and the Ministry of Sportsmanship. I mean, it's crazy. The two entities representing Egypt are sending different messages, opposing messages to the National Olympic Committee. And what's happening there is that where Egypt is losing. It's that simple. There's no alignment between two government or two national entities on sending one message to, a foreign body that's supposed to be governing the world of sports. So I feel that's where the real struggle is, just coming to terms with what Egypt's national identity is in a manner that is satisfying to the majority of the population. But having said that, I want to get back to the tactics, your question. Regarding finance, the formula for the GCC conference is okay. The problem is, I mean, there's always the win-win situation, but the problem, and I might sound a bit leftist here, but the problem might be when money is paid to the government or sponsorship is given to the government in exchange for leverage with the government. And that's what we should be very careful of, that, this is what we've suffered from before. We should completely be aware of, setting up dynamics and tactics and mechanisms that allow private sector participation, even financial, without, I mean, believing it would be with zero leverage is obviously idealistic, but without, opening that room of the remarriage of capital and the state again. And finally, I agree also with something May said, that if you create the context, things will flow on their own, and I have an example of that. Following the 25th of January revolution, one of Egypt's foremost advertising agencies, and I think you know them, they basically won the best advertising agency award in the world, and it's like the Oscars of the advertising agencies. And they just set out on their own, following the 25th of January, to develop a series. I think it was a circular email and videos that was circulating to the companies, branches all over the world to explain to them what was happening in Egypt. That did not require government, did not require money, didn't require anything. They just sent to all, I would like to say the name of the company, but I won't because it would be an ad.
No, please go ahead.
So JWT, they sent to their offices, you know, just emails to their, you know, JWT counterparts all over the world, explaining to them, you know, this is what's happening in Egypt. And all of a sudden you have an army of communication specialists who have an awareness of what's happening, you know, a better understanding, and that's such a small thing, and it's such a, it doesn't constitute any kind of financial burden, but what it does, I mean, it makes a huge difference. So it doesn't necessarily have to be in the form of we're giving them money or they're giving, no, we could always do things as a private sector in order to, you know, improve the image without having to, but just, we have to create the context. What is the context? What is our national identity? What did these events happen for? Where are we going? Are we all clear on this? Great. Everyone go communicate it on their own in their best capacity.
I completely agree with you on that one as well. Maybe that's the solution. Maybe what we're talking about here is the alignment, not necessarily the integration of corporate communications with public diplomacy efforts, whereby when you're doing individual efforts on your own, as long as it's in a sense aligned with the overall strategic foreign policy of the country.
Absolutely.
Rather than, you know, having these ad hoc offshoots that, I heard something, you know, fascinating, and that's really what got me into this whole public diplomacy conference thing, and that was one of the first delegations that went to Russia, and one of the people that were part of the delegation had told the Russians, their counterparts, that the kicking out of the Russian engineers and advisors from Egypt was not a national demand, it was something that Sadat did out of his head. Okay, now, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I haven't read history well, maybe I've been sitting with ambassadors telling me stories that didn't exist, but the reality is, what I know, that this, you know, everybody was really happy with the guy, it was a national sentiment at the point. So today you have a person that is trying to get the Russians to sort of like come to Egypt and create some kind of reenactment of what happened in the 70s, which will never happen. Yep. But the reality here is where the Ministry of Foreign Affairs has a problem with the lack of the alignment of the message that is being sent. Do not speak on behalf of a total nation, saying that there was one man's thing to kick you guys out after giving us weapons that didn't work, after all of these things. That's my problem with the alignment itself. For what you're talking about, the integration, what you're talking about, the solution, I think, from all of you, what you're saying is, it's not so much the integration as much as the alignment. Let us do what we do professionally, but then what they do impacts you negatively, because they're the ones that keep on putting banners with spelling mistakes, having press conferences with bad translation. كل الحاجات ديت. I'm going to take it from May back here again. May, if in 2 minutes, please, you could give us a recommendation, suggestion of the development of a national strategy for public diplomacy in Egypt, on your personal opinion.
What's very important at the beginning is to have one vision. So the country needs to be aligned on one vision, and this is the role the government needs to play at the moment. Set the stage right, one vision, the goals, the objectives. Everyone has to be on board, and then we need a clear roadmap. If we don't have a clear roadmap, if people don't know what things are going to look like in 10, 20 years, they're not going to head into any direction. So to get people heading into a certain direction, you need goals and objectives. You need to be targeted. You need to have people see and they need to visualize what the future is like 10, 20 years from now. This is how economical plan works. This is how strategies work. So this is the first thing we need to do. And then we need to start analyzing very well all the things that we have at stake. Everything. We need to analyze the industries, the sectors, the requirements for each. What messages do we need to communicate for each industry or each sector to promote it? The tourism, it needs certain messaging. Oil and gas needs certain messaging. So we have a variety of sectors and industries to cover. So we need to address that again. This is the second step. The third step is to implement a real on-ground marketing campaign that is targeted locally and internationally, because people need to be informed locally before you start communicating this internationally, because people then are going to act like ambassadors. They are going to understand the identity and where the message is heading, so they can also promote the message. And then we need to measure. Measuring is very important. I think what we do in Egypt, we mostly work on the hit-and-run scenario. We don't care if we have returning customers. We need returning customers. So in order to manage the situation very well, implement a plan, have a vision, see where we're heading in 10, 20 years, get everyone on board, communicate, 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 and then measure. And hopefully we're going to get there. So.
Thank you, May. Ghada, I would, same question to you, please.
I think it all starts with just having again, a clear plan and vision, as May just said. I mean, we need to have a development agenda, and we need to know where we're heading from here. And within that, define different roles and responsibilities. We need an owner. Also, if we're talking here about branding Egypt and managing Egypt's image, we need to know
who in your opinion, Ghada, should be the owner of this?
Oh my God. I think Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I mean, it's some place up there. I mean, they are the ones who are responsible, and then I think they're different. You have to execute it and implement it across the board. So you need to coordinate across all the different institutions, ministries, associations, GAFI, everybody needs to be aligned in what we're trying to do. I would have matrix organizations. In each of those, there's somebody that's all feeding back into having common goals, objectives, messages. And I think that coordination, you come up with a national communication strategy that, in fact, you know that everyone is going to be pushing in their own ways, including the private sector, by the way, as they're lobbying, and having this focal point and being able to monitor. One, be informed also. I don't think we gather enough information. I don't think if you sit today with one official Ministry of Information or, I mean, if you ask them, what do you think the world or XYZ target thinks of you today? We need good information in to feed into our plans, and then we need to monitor if we've succeeded or not in shaping and changing these images over time. This is a systematic approach. It's not something you do overnight. It's not by I mean, you just need time to get there, but you also need to monitor your impact. You need the right people in place, technical expertise, training, refinement, making sure that these people actually understand what's getting done, and they need some leeway once you give them operational guidelines, so on the ground they can act. You need crisis management planning. You need a lot of pieces to come together.
But to have the right staff in the government entities.
Right staff is critical, because without the right people that know how to act at the right moment, or what should and should not be on that billboard or banner that was behind,
you think
without having the right talent.
Salary brackets is that, I mean, His Excellency Ambassador, and I know
but you need
my father was an ambassador.
You need accountability also. I mean, people need to be held accountable. If you're rewarded if you do a good job, and you're punished if you're not. And I think this entire process of, I mean, how we're managing our image and what we're putting out to the rest of the world needs some things to be put in place. في عشوائية today in everything, including who we are. Thank you.
Thank you, Ghada. Dr. Dalia, Bordo, same thing. Your recommendations and suggestions?
I think I will start with Ashwaiya. I agree that their projections are perfect in an ideal world, and we're far from it. What I would hope for, of course, having a national vision, national plan, and it's the best thing. But obviously, we don't have it, and it's not likely that we're going to see it soon. So what I would recommend is that we improve Egypt's image from the civil society. I mean, if the private sector develop a sector-based approach where in each sector you have a champion who knows how to lobby with his peers. And branding is about having a substance, and now social media. If you have substance, if you work hard for it, and you have social media, you can get the message out. And right now, I see that the only segment that can have an impact or effective change is the civil society and the private sector. They have the knowledge, education, system thinking, communication, know-how, some funds. It's not only about funds. they have the sense to make it. So if we take it from here and try to promote the message locally, and it's all about hard work. We'll never be able to brand something that's hollow. Now, I mean, the worst thing that I heard, the most cruel thing that I heard today is we don't have an identity. You're talking about Egypt. If there's one nation in this world who should have an identity, it's Egypt. There has been a systemic effort to I mean, this is systematic effort. If we reach a point whereby Egypt doesn't have an identity, this is cruel. So we have to face it. What we can, leaving this room, what we can do is to get the private sector, create champions not to head the sector, but to know how to lobby with the sector to be the mover and shaker. Getting all these people, getting all financial institutions together to make, to frame a message and get it out in a very professional manner, this is when branding starts to take place. It's not that we want to brand Egypt. What is it that we want to brand Egypt? And who is going to develop this? It's hard work. It's creating substance. It's only when you have substance that you can impact things. I mean, I want to mention something. My child was in Moscow a couple of weeks ago, and he was talking to someone about Egypt, and he told him, Egypt, I don't know. And when he mentioned Nasser and the High Dam, this is Egypt. So now we're just sticking to all things that took place 1,000 years ago, 30, 40 years ago. So again, if the private sector, we have the understanding and the maturity and the knowledge to put things right and promote it, maybe we can take the lead, waiting for the government and the national plan to develop. Thank you.
Amr, I'll close with you with your suggestion and recommendation on developing national plan.
All right, well, I would say you need a national council for developing Egypt's identity. I'm kind of an old school marketeer, so I believe in the 4 Ps a little bit. So, and I like to start with a product, very traditionally. And in my mind, that's where we have an issue. But in doing so, we have to be careful. Setting my personal sentiments about the 30th of June events aside, we cannot repeat the same mistake that was done after the the 25th of January revolution. There was a decision that we have to basically exclude everyone who is NDP. That was a mistake. That's just a big mistake. And just because people believe in different things and they have different aspirations for the country than you do, doesn't make them excluded from society. We have to find a way, some way, in order to involve everyone in the process of developing our national identity, notwithstanding, of course, anyone who has any criminal activities. That's a different issue. But I'm just saying everyone.
Or terrorist activities.
Yeah, I mean, terrorist is criminal. Setting that aside, yeah.
Criminal terrorist.
Yeah. When setting that aside, anyone who's living in Egypt and trying to respect the law but has a different view of what Egypt should be involved in the process of forming the national identity of Egypt. And from that point, I think that's where we can start, thinking about, okay, now we have the product, everyone is involved. What would happen if you do that is you will get less noise, less of the situation that I discussed regarding the Ministry of Sportsmanship versus the Olympic Committee. One person sending one message or one entity sending one message abroad and the other sending an opposing message just because they're not represented. Once we understand that we cannot repeat the same mistakes that we did after the January 25th revolution, then we can have a starting point with the National Committee for Developing Egypt's Identity. And once we have the product, I don't think the communication part is going to be that difficult. You definitely have to involve the private sector. You have to involve talents from the private sector, but that's all tactical, and it's less of a concern than the large underlying issue, which is our national identity.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Ladies, it was a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time. I know you're all really busy. Thank you for being here, and let's please continue to sit together, talk together. Let's not leave this. Let's put pressure. Let's advocate. Let's find the right formula. I don't think we're coming up with conclusions as much as we are trying to find the right formula to put this together. May, Ghada, Dr. Dalia, thank you very much. Karim Bek Hilal, you're next.
Thank you.
I'll hand over the microphone, the floor to Mr. Karim.